أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Where people talk about freedom of speech.
Availability of free speech.
There was an attack on freedom of expression.
Him, because he recently got canceled pretty much.
But when they go to cancel you, ladies and gentlemen, it comes hard and fast.
He said to him, Rashid, you're Muslim, right? And he said, yes. And I said, I want to become a Muslim. Like, I remember saying that to him.
What advice would you give to Salman Rushdie?
La ilaha illallah.
Here we see that more than $200,000 spent.
We've been told that they're out to kill us all.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. We went to the streets to ask Americans about Islam. Here's what they said. Do you know anything about Islam?
No.
Do you know anything about Islam?
No, sadly.
Do you know anything about Islam?
Not really.
Do you know anything about Islam?
No, sorry.
Do you know what Islam means?
Islam? No. We've been told that they're out to kill us all.
That's what you've been told, that Muslims are out to kill you all.
Well, that's what they say on TV.
Anything.
I know it's in the Middle East, isn't it?
Well, then you can have 4 wives.
Brothers and sisters, as you can see, there are so many Americans who don't know about Islam. We need your help to change that. Help us to build the Dean Center, the first mega Dawah center in America. We have $500,000 left and we need your help to finish. Click to donate right now. May God Almighty Allah reward all of you. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, assalamu alaikum. Greetings of peace. Welcome to the Dean Show. I'm Eddie, your host. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on exciting shows just like this one that's coming up with my next guest, Michael Abraham. Michael Abraham is a public school teacher and author, has a degree in political science, and he was born and raised to a Syrian Orthodox Christian father and a Roman Catholic mother. And as he spent time learning about Islam from the Orientalists in the university, while he was observing Muslims, it led him to believe that there had to be something more to being a Muslim than what the media would have had him believe. So let's bring out our next guest, Michael Abraham. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. How you doing, Eddie? Thanks for having me here.
Alhamdulillah. So I always say this, but just being reminded for the listeners out there who just heard you say something in Arabic, so they don't have to take an Arabic class. What did you just say?
I said, peace and blessings of Allah be upon you, and the mercy of Allah be upon you. Man, I say it in Arabic so much, I almost forget how to translate it,
Beautiful. You see, that's the message of Jesus, that greeting of peace. And you are actually named after one of the prophets that we believe, Abraham. It's a beautiful name.
Yeah, and Abraham is actually my last name. And you mentioned that my father is a Syrian Orthodox Christian. And a lot of people ask me why I chose the name Abraham upon becoming a Muslim. I didn't actually choose it. It's my birth last name. So he had an ancestor who came to this country whose name was Ibrahim, and it got changed to Abraham and made his last name when he came here.
So your father, let's start with there. So he was a Syrian Orthodox Christian and your mother is Catholic. So you're kind of mixed in the middle. Which way were you more geared towards coming up, following father or mother?
Yeah, so my father, his grandfathers who immigrated to this country in the early 20th century, when you probably have some idea, there's an increase in immigration from people from Eastern Europe, including Shem, the Levant area, or the area of Western Asia that's now Syria, Jordan, Palestine. So my father's grandfather and grandmother were Syrian immigrants during that time. They came to New York State. And, by the time you get to my father's generation, and him second or third generation, that generation of immigrants really, they strove to assimilate very quickly into American culture, essentially. So, my father, he did not speak Arabic, and he grew up going to Orthodox church, but he really was not a very religious guy. He believed in God, but he's not a very religious guy at all. Whereas my mother has longer roots in the country. They, have been together since they were in high school, and she went to Catholic private school growing up. So through most of my childhood, she was a pretty strong Catholic, and she took us to Catholic, services and Sunday school and this type of thing growing up. So I was more raised heavily Catholic, but knowing that being Arab was a part of my identity, but sort of not really knowing what that means very much, because by the time you get through the assimilation process through a few generations, a lot of it's disappeared.
Wait, so your mother, remind us again. So she was also, she's Catholic, but she's American?
She's American,
Okay.
she's mostly Anglo-Saxon background,
Anglo-Saxon, Irish American.
She has some ancestors been in the country a very, very long time,
Okay, so you're a Syrian Irish.
Yeah, kind of.
Kind of American.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, American, kind of an American mutt, they say.
But you were born and bred in America?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was born. My parents were from New York, but I was born in the state of Minnesota, and mostly grew up here.
Oh, okay. So they were from New York. You're raised in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. I heard you can hear the adhan out there in some places in Minnesota. Is that true?
Yeah, so there's a neighborhood in between downtown Minneapolis and the University of Minnesota campus called the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. And that neighborhood, it is really the epicenter of the Somali diaspora. There's these large towers there. There's all Somali people living in it. So the city the city of Minneapolis did recently pass a ruling. And actually during COVID, they let them do it during Ramadan to have the adhan play out loud. And they've since passed it so that they can do it year round to pass the adhan, to do the adhan out there. Yeah.
So where were you at that time in your life? I mean, most people nowadays, if you want to bring up the Bible, most people don't understand the Bible, don't know the Bible. Some people identify culturally as being Christian. How did you identify when you were coming up? Mother's Catholic, father's Syrian, Orthodox Christian. What would you identify with more?
I would say growing up in the West, like Christianity it's kind of confusing, and going to church every Sunday. I always grappled with the fact that it was hard to get a grip on the history of what this religion was that we were learning and what it was. I can remember, it's part of Catholic service. They read an epistle of Paul, like part of the New Testament that Paul wrote in every service. So they'd always read the letter from Paul or whatever. It's like, well, who's Paul? Just all these types of questions. And all that stuff of, well, Jesus is God, but he's the Son of God. It's like, well, then who's Moses? There's all those types of things, And, my father would not go to church with us growing up. And that always kept me sort of feeling one foot out of the church in a way. And also, too, not identifying Christianity as a masculine thing at all. I actually can remember explicitly from a young age as kind of feeling like Christianity was not really something meant for men. Because I didn't see my father practice it so much because he would just stay home on Sundays. For my mother, the moral teachings of Christianity were very important to her. So like when we would come home from church and this type of thing, whatever was talked about, she'd really focus on the moral aspects of it. And a lot of those things, as there are things that correlate with Islam, being good to one another, being conservative with your, interpersonal relations with the opposite gender, all that type of stuff. And, she was actually fairly heavy on talking about those values and their benefit in a secular way to us. So I did inculcate a lot of those values that my mother taught me over time. Honesty was such a big thing with my mother. And she was a mother who, she's the type of mother who could always tell when you were lying somehow. And she'd always find out. So, my mother did a really good job raising me in this regard and bringing me up with those values. Now, you might know, some people might know the process of Catholicism. Catholicism has a process to it. So you're baptized when you're very little. You have first communion when you're like 7 or 8. And then about the time you're a teenager, you go through something called confirmation. Now, by the time I was 13 and about to start taking confirmation classes, my older sister had really gotten into Marxism. And even though I was only in 8th grade at this time, she was teaching me about Marxism. Of course, Marxism has all these anti-religious sentiments and, teaches you that religion is the opium of the masses, just something meant to manipulate you. So I have an older brother and older sister. While my older brother had gotten confirmed while he was in high school, my sister chose not to. And because she was doing all this learning about Marxism and teaching it to me, and she was kind of teaching me all these criticisms against the Catholic Church and stuff, I chose not to go to confirmation classes and chose not to get confirmed as a Catholic when I was in 8th grade. Now it was a contentious issue with my mother at the time because my mother was actually the teacher of the confirmation classes I was supposed to go to. And I went to the first one and then didn't go to any of the ones after that. So, I mean, looking back on it, this was, and I mean, I knew it at the time too, but somewhat of an awkward thing for her to be the teacher of those classes. And then after the first class, it's like, your son isn't even coming. However, at the end of the day, my mother did respect that it was my choice at the end of the day. And she really encouraged me against it. She told me, you're going to regret it somewhere, somewhere down the road in your life and this type of thing. But she let it be my choice. I can remember at that time, and it was another thing I held on to in life till later on, like that feeling, these criticisms I had and confusions I had of that maybe not want to go through with getting confirmed being Catholic. It wasn't that I felt a discordance with the values that my mother taught me. A lot of those core religious values a lot of people have. And I can remember it being tough trying to communicate that to her at the time, that, a lot of what you've taught me, like, I still believe that stuff is right. I just don't really think this is the route to it, And after that, I never disbelieved in God in life. I never became atheist or this type of thing. But I did, in my teenage years, develop these Marxist types of criticisms towards religion, that type of thing. I can remember discussing that. But, when I eventually embraced Islam, I saw it as a natural conclusion to living out a lot of what my mother had imbibed in me from a young age with the values that she did teach me.
Can you say Marxism is synonymous with communism?
Yeah, I'd say so. The kind of religion's the opium of the masses. The Catholic Church has been manipulated people and taken over people throughout history, and it just religion's a tool of control. That type of criticism.
But there is some truth to that statement as far as religion being used to manipulate
100%.
people, because you have man-made religions and people can do that, just like they can do that with communism or any other system. Would you say?
Well, absolutely. And when you grow up, I mean, at this time, I knew nothing about Islam. I had hardly heard about Islam at this point in my life. This is as a teenager in the 1990s in America. And, when you have that experience and you get exposed to those types of criticism at a young age, the tendency you have and what you do is you just associate as that's all religion. And that's kind of what Marxism itself did. It just tries to put all religion in one basket. So, I mean, all of that sets the stage for later in life when I actually learn about what Islam is, for it to appear very profound to me.
Before we go to that, help the audience understand the main difference between your father's religion, the Orthodox Syrian Christian, what they believed, and it seemed like your father really wasn't practicing.
Right.
And then your mother, Catholicism. What's the main difference there?
I'm not the best person to speak on that because I wasn't into the Syrian Orthodox practice a whole lot growing up. It's just like some of that stuff are things that I don't know totally.
So would you say what I understood is, when you study comparative religion, you see that Catholicism, you have more and more of the you have confession box.
Yes.
I don't think you don't have confession box with the Orthodox Church.
Yeah,
right?
no, that's a difference. They don't
That's one main difference, right?
I believe praying to the rosary, this type of thing, they don't.
Yeah, so you have a lot more saints. You have, but you also have some. Do you have some saints in Orthodox Christianity also?
Well,
right?
I know the church fathers are a big deal in the Orthodox Church. They make a big deal about the bishops and this type of thing. I do know that.
Yeah, but the core, pretty much, Trinity is in both of them.
Correct. Yes. Yep.
And then the Catholicism making Mary a mother, where she's the mother of God. This is really emphasized, right?
I believe so. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So when you come now and you start to look into, before you get to looking deeper into Islam, you got to spend some time learning about it through the Orientalists.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. So, knowing that
so you're talking about, you're in a university, you don't have a Muslim who's practicing Islam, and this is very common, right? Someone who's living Islam and teaching you Islam, how it should be. You have someone, define this term, Orientalist, who's teaching you Islam.
Yeah, so, when I went into college, I ended up pursuing a degree in political science with a focus on Middle Eastern politics. I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened. And so, as well as Desert Storm, when I was in early elementary school, those were things that happened in life that made me wonder about the Arab world. And just, Syria is part of that part of the world. And I wasn't really connected to it in any way, aside from just some of the food that my father would eat. So, when the War on Terror happened, I really felt a pressure to actually learn about what it was all about and learn what was going on. So I ended up pursuing a degree in political science with a focus on Middle Eastern politics. And when you do that, it starts to become pretty apparent that there's this religion that everyone practices in that part of the world. And through certain media channels, you'd hear it be talking about after 9/11, that you have to learn about. Now, you're correct, especially at the University of Minnesota. The University of Minnesota's political science department and their cultural studies department is really, I would say, not a great place for someone to learn about Islam, at least how it was 15, 16 years ago when I was there,
No, why do they have the topic then?
Well, I mean, it's Orientalist studies. An Orientalist, I mean, that's a term given to Western academics who study and characterize the Muslim world, especially the Arab world, but the Muslim world, and generally characterize it in a way to suit the agendas of the West.
So this is kind of, would you term, again, synonymous, someone who's an opponent to Islam, who has,
it's
some kind of bias there.
I would say so.
So if I'm teaching, as a martial arts teacher, let's say I don't like a certain martial art and I'm over here teaching, let's say, Shaolin Kung Fu, right? That I'm not really a fan of. And I've studied a little bit, but I'm not actually a master Sifu in Kung Fu. It's like, I should stick in my lane, no?
Absolutely. Something you see there is a big thing you see is a real hesitancy to get to the meat of what Orthodox Islam actually is. Even like with these professors who they try to feign being unbiased and this type of thing, and a lot of the reading material they give you, it really overly focuses on the sectarianism in the Muslim world. It overly emphasizes that. A lot of people who only study Islam in that sort of vein, something they come out with, a lot of people will think that the population of Shia and the population of Sufis, the population of secularists in the Muslim world are in way larger numbers than they actually exist. That's just one crux of the kind of confusion that you get. And again, it just focuses on, you studied political science is a pseudoscience. So anything you do there, it focuses on crafting just these characterizations of things to, fit a culture of critique that's modeled in the Western world that doesn't really fit into properly understanding Islam very well. But you glean some things, you glean some things that make you curious is what happens. It happened to me.
I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to actual Muslims. So someone who'll be a Muslim, not really practicing Islam, and then when you want to share Islam, because you'll see them, let's say something very basic, like not praying 5 times a day, for instance. And then you'll try to explain some of the basics. They say, no, you don't have to tell me. I took Islam in the universities. I know Islam, but they're not living it. And then when you start talking about it, it's like, there's a big conflict with the two.
An area I see that now, as you know, I do education of public school K through 12 educators now about Islam and about the needs of Muslim students and about many different things concerning K through 12 curriculum. I always get social studies teachers in high school. They always come into my trainings thinking that they already know about Islam because they've studied history or this type of thing. And you can teach them some of the most basic stuff about Islam, especially basic things about the everyday practice and how it affects someone's life. And it's all new to them. It's all new to them.
Exactly. Same experience.
I find the same thing with them. They really have overblown notions, especially about the place of non-Orthodox practices, I would say. And that actually really affects those teachers because they oftentimes assume that religiously their student bodies of Muslim students are more diverse religiously than they really are.
So that's where I want to take my next question and spend a little time here. Did you, while you were studying in the university, learning from the Orientalists, did this name Salman Rushdie come up?
Decay in the availability of free speech to Americans.
Freedom of speech is one of the most fundamental, important, universal rights.
At all, in his work?
I can't recall that it came up in university specifically, but I had learned about Salman Rushdie actually from my sister when I told you about back when I was in high school. The whole Salman Rushdie incident, that was one of the few things that I had actually learned about Islam or about the Muslim world at that time. And I can remember it being characterized to me via her and it being characterized by Salman Rushdie that Muslim populations of people, they don't read books or they don't read this type of thing, you know.
Yeah.
And actually, in both my mother and my sister, they were very big. They were English literature majors, so they were very big into literature, this type of thing. So I can recall my sister having a fascination with that whole incident when I was younger, and being one of the first impressions I got about the Muslim world.
We wouldn't even be talking about it, but as you know, it's been brought up again. It's in the news,
Yeah.
you know, because someone went and took the law into their own hands. You know, obviously, you know, this is something that Islam condemns. You know, going vigilantism, right?
No. Yep.
So someone did that, and now his name, now this guy again, he's brought up, and he's like the epitome of freedom of speech. What are your thoughts on that when you hear that?
Well, it's really something, you know. I mean, the whole experience I had of coming to Islam in college amidst, you know, studying politics amidst the war on terror and this type of thing. I mean, that really made me reflect quite a bit about how the media affects people's perceptions of things. You know, and something I went through too when I became Islam was really seeing a contrast between what the university would say about Islam, what the media would say about Islam, and then the very prominent Somali community that we have here in Minneapolis. Because, you know, especially at that time, some of the classmates I had at university, people I'd see in my neighborhood, the shops I go to, this type of thing. I'd see a lot of community, a lot of good behavior, this type of thing from them. But, you know, kind of let me know that there had to be something more to this religion than all that. So, I mean, I think the Salman Rushdie affair going on, I mean, it really just upsets me that it's just another thing that we have to be reacting to. And I think as Muslims, you know, we need to really be developing strategies on how we proactively educate people about Islam in a comprehensive way. And being in education has really made me think about that. And that's why I've put some of the projects that I have together to do that.
Mm-hmm. Do you find it hypocritical when now he's championed as someone who is, where people talk about freedom of speech?
There was an attack on freedom of expression and someone who is probably just the luminary in the world.
Hands off Rushdie! Hands off free speech! Free speech!
A symbol of free speech. Just what is freedom of expression? Without the freedom to offend, he said, it ceases to exist.
You know, but then you have others. Recently he's kind of been someone who we had on the program, and we don't obviously endorse, you know, people's behavior outside of Islam, people who do things obviously not according to how, you know, how God wants you to live. But the person's not a Muslim,
right?
But there's some things that he said, and he came on the program, and he's very respectful and whatnot. And we pray that God Almighty Allah guides him, that he comes to Islam. This gentleman by the name of Andrew Tate. Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah, I've heard of him, but I can't say I've ever really listened to his stuff.
Yeah. So that was interesting. I just wanted to ask you, when you see someone like him, because he recently got canceled pretty much.
But when they go to cancel you, ladies and gentlemen, it comes hard and fast. You lose your Facebook, then your Instagram, then your Gmail, then your Discord, your bank. Then, like, it's just like in real time, you're watching your phone and apps just exploding. Boom, boom, boom.
And I'm like, okay, people are wondering what happened to the freedom of speech when it's geared towards the Muslims. It's kind of like say whatever you want. And then people use this as the, you know, get out of getting canceled card. But on the other side, you know, there's certain restrictions to freedom of speech just when it's not against Islam and Muslims.
Absolutely. You know, Eddie, I personally, I think hypocrisy is sort of integral to Western culture in a way, which might, you know, that might sound like a harsh thing to say, but I really do think that you see that all over. And I think it is part of our job to point that out to Western society, you know, in a constructive way, but also in different ways and different means. So you really just see it all over the place. You know, certainly with freedom of expression, certainly with some of the ideals underlying liberal education, because, you know, ostensibly a liberal education is supposed to be one ostensibly where you look at all different opinions and then you analyze it objectively to determine which is the best one or things. But when you actually look at how liberal education takes place, you actually see many different world perspectives are explicitly suffocated. And oftentimes the system itself, it's not even really ready to take opinions outside a secular liberal paradigm. So, I mean, just that itself is hypocrisy. Working in education, the student body population in the United States has gone through a big transformation in the last 20 years, with 2000 to 2010 being the highest period of immigration in the United States, certainly the highest period of Muslim immigration. You find all these schools talking a lot about diversity and how they value diversity, and they value multiculturalism, and they value the culture of students and families and the home culture and all that type of stuff. But then when they do that, they only want to talk about that in ways under certain constructs that the academic departments in Western culture have already put together. And then especially when these schools, they have Muslim populations of students that they're serving in them, you cannot honestly, authentically talk about Muslim culture and respecting Muslim culture without talking about Islam, and without knowing and learning about Islam, and without respecting Islamic perspectives of viewing the world and viewing any issue that could come up. But there's virtually no place for that. There's been no place developed for that in the education system.
Mm-hmm. Now that you're someone who spent some time, also you went to Saudi.
Yeah.
And you were teaching there for a few years. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Saudi is actually where I started as a teacher. So I did a degree in political science, but the first thing I did after finishing my bachelor's degree was I ended up working at an elementary school in Jeddah. It was a Saudi private school that was trying to implement an American-style curriculum to Saudi citizens. So I ended up getting thrown in to the profession of teaching, and I was in Saudi for 3 years. A lot of brothers have gone, to the Khalij, to the Arabian Peninsula, and done various forms of teaching English. I'm one of the few who I ended up coming back and joining the public education system here, and I got a teaching degree here, master's degree in education. So I've been working as a licensed teacher in the United States for 9 years now. And again, I developed a professional development education program and wrote a book called Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools, in an effort to begin educating the education system here and the society in general better about Islam.
I mean, were you nervous before you went? I mean, with all the propaganda and people that are thinking that, okay, if I go to that part of the world as an American, they hate us. I might get my head cut off.
No, I was not afraid. I mean, I had already become Muslim before I went to Saudi. I've been Muslim about 3 years before I went to Saudi.
Okay, so this is before you accepted Islam.
Correct. So I knew brothers there, this type of thing. I knew people from there, all that type of stuff. Now the family, on the other hand, and my wife also, she was my girlfriend before I accepted Islam, so she's also from a non-Muslim family. So getting all of them to feel settled about that was a little different thing. That was just every stereotype in the book coming out with that. Mm-hmm. So that was more the issue that I had to overcome before going to Saudi.
Now, what were the key leading points that had you determine that, okay, look, Syrian father, Catholic mother, there's a lot of culture involved here. I'm taking a big step forward, to look into Islam, and now I'm going to probably go up against the odds here with my family and society. What had you push through all that you were like, man, this is very powerful to have you accept it, to have you accept Islam, submission to the creator, not the creation? What did it for you at the end?
Well, Eddie, it's a very deep question. And I'll just say this, because it's a lot to talk about. Ultimately, when I decided to become Muslim was when I went to a Somali bookstore in that same neighborhood I was telling you about, Cedar Riverside, which was right by the University of Minnesota. I went into a bookstore there and told them I needed an English translation of the Quran, because it had bothered me taking classes in university and studying like Islamist politics, as they would call it, or this type of thing, or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they never had us read the Quran. And it just becomes clear. It's like when are we going to read this? So I went and sought it out myself, and even just leading up to that, my acceptance of Islam was a very strong journey in intellectual conviction. And the family I grew up in overall, like politically, they were more liberal than they were right wing, if you want to call it that, growing up. As you study politics in university, and I was always told to, have an open mind and learn and that type of stuff. So, as you grow up, you explore different perspectives from kind of both sides of the political spectrum, if you will. You come to learn that, there's an intellectual foundation to conservative thought as well as liberal thought. And as I looked at those things, the different things I found myself agreeing with were kind of a mix of the two. you know. But, you know, and also too, just living in the city, and I'd walk around Minneapolis a lot and talk to people on the street and this type of thing, and seeing things that just go on with your own friends in American culture and the things people get caught up in. And again, you know, having that foundation of my mother's own religious teachings that I told you about, like, you know, when I was at that age, as in my very early 20s, you know, I was really beginning to see the value of religious teachings and religious moral values overall, and that there needs to be a foundation in it. And Islam, to the extent I learned about in university and what I could glean from it, it was appealing to me. Something that was a big appeal to me about it was the prohibition of alcohol. Because I'd seen so many people in my life fall into that vice, and it ruined their lives. Of course, every American family's had someone touch that. But, you know, something that I never could get a grip on when I was studying Islam in university, I actually didn't know whether or not it was a religion someone could accept and just join. That wasn't something that was made clear. And that was something that I felt was evading my studies. It's like, well, and you know, also too, when you grow up Christian, the next religion outside your own you maybe know something about is Judaism. And you know that Judaism belongs to a certain tribe of people. So, you know, you're studying Islam, it's like, well, it's not just a religion for the Arabs, because there's all these Somali people who practice it, this type of thing. So I couldn't get I didn't have a full grip on whether or not Islam was something that you join by birth or something that you accept. But when I read you know, honestly, Eddie, when I got the translation of the Quran, I actually have it right here, the one that I read. I got about 5 verses into Surah Al-Baqarah before I knew I was going to accept this religion.
5, only
Yeah,
5 verses.
About 5 verses.
In the verbatim word of God Almighty, the Quran,
Yep.
your 5 verses.
Yep.
There's a second chapter of the Quran,
Yep.
and you're like, I know this is the truth.
Correct.
That's all it took.
That's all it took.
5 verses. That's it, and you knew the Quran was the truth. That had such a powerful impact on you. Just those 5 verses.
Yep. And you know, as you read, and this was the summer of 2007. And man, Eddie, I spent that summer with my face in that translation of the Quran. And you know, when you have this type of confused Christian upbringing that I grew up under, you know, and you read the Quran and everything it says, it really just makes everything make sense. It just makes everything make sense. And you know, that summer, and even the moment when I knew that I had to accept Islam, it's a lot to explain, but I felt like every moment in my life had led up to that moment, Mm-hmm. And I tell people, you know, this was 15 years ago now. I've never had doubts about Islam since accepting it. I've never had any doubts about it. Some people, you know, we all struggle with trying to be the best Muslims we are and all that type of thing. You know, of course, I have those types of struggles, but I've never had any doubts about Islam. And core to it also, you know, studying politics and analyzing society at that age, you know, you very much want to find solutions for people and solutions to the problems of the world and this type of thing. And, you know, sometimes you look at it and you think like, you know, maybe there is no solutions. There is no answers for mankind. And then when you discover Islam, you know, you realize that God did not leave mankind alone without any solutions. Mm-hmm. And just the gift of having discovered that is something that I will never let go of how strong that feeling was at that time. And since that time, you know, obviously I've had a whole journey within the Muslim community and different Muslims and this type of thing. And a lot of times Muslims were talking about our inter-community issues and this type of thing. But I've always held on to it as it being part of my own purpose and something that I have to do to partake in educating Western society better about Islam. Because it will solve so many of the Muslims' issues. It will solve the West's issues. And of course, when you read the Quran, you read about prophets, peace be upon all of them, who were sent to their own people and sent to their own nations to give them this message. So that is what I've tried to live out as best I can and strategize around since I became Muslim.
SubhanAllah, I'm really amazed that it just took 5 of those verses. Obviously, your heart was open. You were seeking the truth at that time. You're looking, you're yearning.
Yeah.
And
you know, the thing is, Eddie, those first verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, and for people who don't know, it may be the second chapter, but the first chapter is only 7 verses. So this is very early in reading it. You know, what it describes is who the book is for. That's who it describes. So it's for those who believe in the unseen, and those who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those who believe in the revelation, and those who believe in revelation. So once I read that, I mean, I realized it was a religion that was open to anyone who will accept it, who wants to accept its message.
Now, before that, you obviously went through the first chapter of the Quran.
Yeah.
Right? Can you go? Sorry to put you on the spot. Can you, for those not yet Muslims, non-Muslims who are out there, never got to hear the Quran? It's so beautiful to hear a new Muslim going and reciting a language that you never spoke. You didn't speak Arabic, right? Growing up? No. An American, born, bred in America.
Yeah.
Can you go ahead and recite the opening of the Quran, please, for us?
Oh man, you're making me do this. Well, first of all, I read the whole translation that summer. And it's taken me a while to get into Tajweed classes, the art of reciting the Quran. But I will do my
people
best.
Understand. Please.
Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الرحمن الرحيم. مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Ameen. Beautiful. MashaAllah. MashaAllah. Beautiful. And just to hear it coming from someone, how long has it been now since you accepted Islam?
15 years.
15 years. And this is something that every Muslim learns it, recites it every day in the 5 daily prayers minimum. And just to hear someone like yourself, reciting it, this is a living miracle, the Quran. And just for someone to think, this is something that the Quran has a challenge, a test, is preserved, tamper-free, tamper-proof. We have it in its original. And you're a living testimony to that.
Inshallah. May Allah accept from all of us.
Ameen. So this is something that it's just amazing. It's mind-blowing for anybody like Salman Rushdie. If he's sitting there writing about, Islam and the Quran, and what do you think's missing here for someone like that? Someone who's, I've heard that he's not even really a great writer, but they elevated him so much so because of this. If someone like him now he's got a chance to, he could turn his life around also with all the harm that he's done to himself and to others, and to, trying to do harm to Islam. But it just, at the end of the day, I mean, it's like spitting up at the sun. It's going to come right back at you. So now I think he's in the last phases of his life, and he's gotten, recently what happened to him. What do you think he's missing? He could, let's say he sees this. It's a good chance he might, right? What advice would you give to Salman Rushdie?
Well, it's probably unlikely he's going to listen to my advice, but I mean, he's old, one way or the other, he's getting to the end of his time. So he has, no one will avoid death. No one will avoid death. And you have to make a decision. The thing is, this dunya, it distracts people. And that's the big temptation of the West. It uses the dunya to tempt people and manipulate them and, make them forget about where they are going eventually. All of us are going to die. We know that. We all know it. And because we all know we're going to die, we know that this life is a preparation for the next life. So if we choose to neglect that, you choose to sell the next life for a miserable price in this life, then you've incurred a punishment upon yourself. That's simply the reality of it. So my advice to him would be to take the testimony of faith in Islam and to accept Islam before he dies.
And what's that testimony of faith? That's the one that you took to enter into submission to the Creator, not the creation, Islam.
Yes. Yeah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu rasulullah. So there's no deity worthy of worship except God alone. and Muhammad is the servant and messenger of God.
Let's spend a second on that. It's so beautiful. It's a negation first, that you're not going to worship anything in creation, nothing that you can see, touch, or feel. You're not worshiping it except the creator who created creation, the one who created Jesus, Abraham, which your name is named after. He created Muhammad, peace and blessing be upon all of them, the sun, the moon, everything. You're not going to worship a nationality, your ego, your desires, nothing but the one who created you. That makes so much sense, man. It's so simple to understand, isn't it?
Absolutely.
How did you feel when you took your Shahada? Describe those moments now. And where did you take Shahada? Was it in a masjid? Was it with...
Yeah. So, that summer, I spent that whole summer reading the Quran. Now, even after I started reading it, knew I wanted to become Muslim, I didn't actually know how to become Muslim because I hadn't learned that. And I ended up taking Shahada. I was working in restaurants at the time, and there was an Ethiopian brother who ran a chiropractic office behind the restaurant that I worked at. And I told him, I remember I was serving him coffee. And I said to him, Rashid, you're Muslim, right? And he said, yes. And I said, I want to become a Muslim. Like, I remember saying that to him.
So at this point, you want to become a Muslim.
I spent almost 3 months knowing I wanted to be Muslim, but not knowing how to become Muslim. And I'll never forget when I said that to him. His face just lit up, and his eye just got so wide when I said that to him. And he had to go like after that. But he's like, wait, I'm gonna come back to you. And he came back like a week later, and he didn't quite understand how much I had read already, I think. And he told me, it's a big decision, and you have to make sure like it's right for you. So what he did, he brought me actually to one of our local Somali malls we have here. There's a few malls that are run by the Somali community. And he actually bought me this book, Islam in Focus, this is by like some professor from Princeton in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And he gave that to me, and he said, like here, read this. And he said, I'm going away back to Ethiopia for a month because I'm getting married. And when I come back, I'll take you to a mosque. Like, I don't know, he didn't want to give me the Shahada for some reason. So he gave me that. He also gave me a DVD. This is back in the DVD days. He got me a DVD at that mall of Khalid Yasin, a classic Dawah DVD of him giving a lecture entitled, "What Do You Really Know About Islam?" Mm-hmm. And that was my first exposure to any type of Muslim personality, da'i type figure. I hadn't had any exposure to that before I decided I wanted to become Muslim. So I watched that, and I actually learned this book. Through this book, I tried learning how to pray. Like it has pages in it where it tries to teach you step how to do it, this type of thing. So I tried starting all that type of stuff. But anyway, when that brother came back, it was the first night of Ramadan. It was the first night of Ramadan in September 2007. It was September 12th. I remember the date. The first night that Ramadan came in, he took me to Masjid al-Huda on Central Avenue in Minneapolis, across the street from Holy Land Restaurant. People in Minnesota know it. And it was Sheikh Jamal bin Amur, who's still around here. And also, too, that masjid was kind of the center of the Islamic University in Minnesota, which some people know, too, now. And it was from the sheikh that he led me in the Shahada there. And there was young brothers and older brothers sitting around. We did it. Some of them who I'm still connected with and still know. And then I prayed Maghrib in the Jama'ah with them for the first time. And it was the first night of Ramadan. And I can remember the sheikh explaining to me the hadith at that time of how on the first night of Ramadan, all the shayateen are locked up and all the angels are set free. And then I began fasting right away. And that same brother who ran that chiropractic office, he took me to Tate. He picked me up and took me to Tate at that masjid every night, my first year becoming Muslim.
It's just amazing, man, just hearing all this and just taking it back to something that's just so simple. If a human being is searching for the purpose of life and they're like reflecting upon our departure date, we're all going to leave this life sooner or later. Mm-hmm. And then just doing a simple investigation, looking at, the different claims that are out there and weigh Islam next to it. And what captivated me really is the simple message and the pure monotheism, the Tawheed, what we call it, that stands out from everything else, because in every other man-made religion, you got some form of creation worship or associating God to being a man in some way or less of a God. But Islam just
And
making that clear distinction that the creator is the creator and the creation is the creation, and you don't worship anything in creation, but you only worship the one creator. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say a big thing about, for me too, Eddie, with Tawheed is the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the definition that the Quran gives to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being all seeing and all hearing, and that you're going to be held accountable. Americans are so political, like political identification. I think it's superseded religious identification in the West. And, certainly having some exposure to Marxism and this type of thing growing up, but also even just coming from a family that was like more liberal and this type of thing. Sometimes people, they look at like things like the government as if it can solve everyone's problems or do everything. And it simply cannot, no matter how much it tries. Even if we have a technological overhaul, super big brother state like China's trying to put together, where they have a camera on everybody, it will not be able to stop everyone from doing wrong. So a realization I had was that to really have a just society and to have a wholesome society and to keep people from falling into these vices that people fall into, such as alcohol and drug addiction, amongst other things, people really have to have a fear of God. They have to have a sense that God is watching them. That is an idea I developed, again, before I read the Quran. And that was part of the first 5 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah that hit me so hard, that it talked explicitly about the fear of God in it. And of course the word taqwa, it is more encompassing than the word fear, which is what's used in the verse. But that was a big part of what hit me so profoundly as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned the communist state there, communist country, and then them putting cameras all over the place to have you fear getting caught and looked at, and then exposed. But when you have the taqwa, the God consciousness in your life, and that fear of God, you love God, the driving force is love, and then you live between a balance of fear and hope. But now you know that there's an angel on the right writing the good deeds. There's an angel on the left writing the bad deeds. This is ingrained in you. You don't need no cameras, because a Muslim, you leave him alone with $1 or $1 million. He fears God. You can trust that Muslim. You'll get your money back, right? Because that's that taqwa.
That's absolutely right.
That's amazing. And you got behind you. Let's a few more things I want to ask you. You have because people say, is that the box you guys worship behind you? What's that Kaaba back there? And that's right behind you. You got the picture. Can you? There's some people that believe that you guys worship a black box in the desert.
Yeah, and I can remember hearing that stereotype before I became Muslim. I can remember hearing it, and of course, Muslims will call it Baytullah, which can be translated as the house of Allah. And some Orientalists back in the day tried to say that means that Muslims think that God lives in that, which of course it is not. It's the central. It's the direction towards which Muslims direct their worship when they pray. And, the building of it is told in the Quran, in the story of Abraham, with his son Ishmael.
Yeah, first house of worship built by Abraham and his son Ishmael to commemorate the worship of one and only one God. And isn't it? There's also it's mentioned in the Bible. You have Mecca called Becca, actually.
No, that's correct.
It's there. That's the house. And then the other thing is you also specialize now as a teacher, teaching for all these years.
That's correct.
I want to spend a little bit of time before we conclude, ask you some questions about this, because it's becoming very tricky for teachers now. How are you handling this with all of the new age stuff that's happening and all of this confusion that's out there? Public school teachers now are really in a dilemma, especially those who hold to a higher moral ground.
Well, I'm glad you asked about that, Eddie. And, the public education and the opportunities that exist for us as Muslims, as well as the challenges, is really something that I've gotten online the past year about to try to educate Muslims more about. And there is definitely challenges. And to be clear, I don't recommend to Muslims that they send their kids to public schools. If they can homeschool or send them to an Islamic private school, they should do that. But the reality in the United States is most Muslims are choosing, for one reason or another, to send their kids to public schools. And many Muslim families don't have another choice, for, especially our families who've gone through a refugee background. They're of a low socioeconomic status. Maybe mom and dad are both working 2 jobs. They don't have another choice. So advocating for our kids in the public schools is something that we have to do, and it is something that we can do. You know, there is competing pressures in public schools. There's competing pressures, but the American education system is also unique. It's unique in the respect that it is designed to be local first. It is not a top-down structure. The 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution actually prohibits the federal government from creating a nationwide school curriculum. So school curriculum is at its largest done at the state level, but it's really more done at the district level. And schools nowadays, too, public schools, as far as families are concerned, they have competition, stiff competition to get families to come to their school, because almost all states have some form of school choice now between district schools and charter schools, as well as private schools and homeschooling being an option for families as well. So this is actually an untapped source of power that the Muslim community has in America that they have not properly utilized. The schools, the public education system needs our kids. It's dependent on them. And even if we don't send our kids to those schools, we are still taxpayers in those places. And the fact that we don't send our kid to the local public school costs that school money. So we have an opportunity to educate them on why. And the schools are opening to listening to this. And the field of professional development in education is an opportunity to do this. And this is where I've been working for the past 6 years nonstop. As far as the pressures being a teacher, you do get pressures from all over the place. However, teachers' unions are a highly influential force nationwide in the public school system. And I belong to a teachers' union here. Teachers' unions can be good or bad as far as how we see it, but something that they give teachers a lot of protection. They give teachers a lot of autonomy. They also shield teachers from accountability in a lot of ways. So a lot of times people have a misperception over, if a district says to do this, then all the teachers are doing it. Or if someone, at the state government thinks this is a good idea to do in the schools, then all the teachers are doing it. It's really not that way completely. Teachers actually operate as independent agents in a lot of ways. And the single biggest factor that plays into what goes on in American public school classroom is the choice of the individual teacher in that classroom. And even if a district puts together a curriculum or something like this, because of teacher union contracts, typically that curriculum doesn't have any authoritative weights with what a teacher does in the classroom beyond being a recommendation. So this can be good or bad for Muslim families. It can be good because there's an opportunity for us to educate educators about our desires as a Muslim community and what we want for our kids and the knowledge that they need to have to properly understand Muslim children, Muslim families, and the Muslim community. And we can offer them resources to learn more about that, and even resources they can learn in the classroom that they can use in the classroom to respect our kids more. On the flip side of it, it can create a conundrum for Muslim families, because if our kids are put in a classroom with a teacher who decides they want to do this or they want to do something like that, or teach about this or ask the kids about that, which is something that we may not want them to, the accountability mechanisms that we can put on those teachers might be limited. It might be limited, especially if they belong to a teachers union, because the teachers union is ultimately going to protect them. It's even going to shield their own administration from how much they can go into that teacher's classroom and even observe them and find out what is going on in their classroom. So we have to understand this aspect of teacher autonomy going on in the schools. And any Muslim family who sends their kid to public school, they have to try to proactively educate that teacher and the school in general and the principal at the school about Islam and about what we want and what is needed for Muslim children and families. And I hope you'll give me an opportunity to plug my book and training program here, Eddie.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've written a book called Educating Muslim Students in Public Schools. And I run it. It was first a training program that I did in Minneapolis. I've educated people from every school district in the Twin Cities area, as well as greater Minnesota, as well as people from every school district, not every member, but at least some people from every school district in the Seattle metro area, in the Columbus, Ohio metro area. And now doing it online now after COVID and stuff, I've had over 2,000 educators take the full training from over 20 different states. And I've sold over 500 copies of the book. So it is work that is spreading. And if people go to abrahameducation.com, they can refer educators to that to take my training, where they will learn authentically and comprehensively what Islam is and what that means for Muslim children and families, and how to not step on that and how to actually honor that in their classrooms and school environment. And Eddie, it's really an opportunity for us to, because since I became Muslim, I have reflected upon how we can cross barriers to educating American society better about Islam. And too often we are stuck in certain echo chambers in how we try to get the non-Muslims aware about Islam. So, we can do things through media, and that's great, and we have to, but the reach of that will always be limited. I really respect brothers who do street dawah and everything like that. That is very important. But the people who are going to approach a booth like that are limited. The public education system, there's over 3 million licensed teachers in America. It is the most licensed profession in the country. Public school teachers, they may not have a personal interest in learning about Islam, but they do have a professional interest because they're teaching Muslim kids. And they have these families in our community, and we have a young population of kids. We have more kids age K through 12 in our community than we do people older than that. And these public schools, they feel that. They know that there's more kids from the Muslim community than you see in the community more broadly. So that is a point of leverage that we have in the society. And oftentimes, especially immigrant families, they're intimidated. Oftentimes, they feel a sense of accountability themselves to the schools, and they're worried about how schools are going to look at them. But a lot of people in America, they don't treat their local public school that way. A lot of people in America, they treat the local public school like the school serves them. And it does serve them. It's meant to serve them because you're the taxpayer and you're the one who sends your kid there. And they are dependent on your kid going to that school for that school to exist. So I've put together these resources so Muslim families can have an efficient way of going to their school, emailing the principal, emailing the teacher, and saying, here, I recommend this training for your public school educators, or I recommend your school study this book so you can actually learn about the needs and wants of Muslim families. And all teachers have to get continuing education credit hours to maintain their teaching license, and they get that for doing my training. So a lot of them want to do that. And again, in education, there is a big emphasis on respecting diversity and respecting multiculturalism and all this type of thing. But as Muslims, we have to call people out on their hypocrisy, or we have to challenge them when they're being hypocritical and they don't realize it, because they can talk about diversity all day long. But if that doesn't mean actually learning about Islam, for all intents and purposes, you're not respecting the diversity of the Muslim community. And therefore, they're not authentically trying to serve our kids as they say is their mission to do.
We're almost out of time, but I just want to touch upon this, just indulge in this a little bit deeper. So I hear what you're saying, and I agree what you said earlier, that it's very dangerous, and it's a great chance to lose your child, sending him to a public institution like that if you're not debriefing them every day, not just are they learning sometimes a very different language than they're learning at home, and the kind of profanities that a lot of times go unchecked, the drugs, a lot of times the dating, promiscuity, you have even, and I'm sure you've been exposed to a lot of it, young girls becoming grandmothers. You think of grandmother, you think of someone old, but you have young girls becoming grandmothers now, and this is not in marriage. So you have the disrespect towards not only teachers, but they pick up this attitude, bring that back home, the celebration of pagan holidays. And the list goes on of a lot of the evil vices that we try to, it's endless. So it's endless. You understand that. I don't have to educate you on that. You see what's going on, but now it's becoming even more alarming. So what do you have to say now when you have a system that is teaching that a boy can be a girl can be a boy, this gender fluidity? And I had a teacher say that, look, she's thinking that she's not going to be able to teach anymore because usually what's happening is that during the beginning of the school year, they're dividing the boys into girls. So now because the boys are a little bit more rowdy, so you kind of have this many boys, this many girls, but she's been told that she can't even call the boys boys anymore.
This stuff is on the increase. It's not everywhere. What is mandated regarding these types of things is different from states to state. It's certainly probably at its worst on the West Coast. The state of Massachusetts is not great as well as far as what's mandated. But again, like even if it's not mandated, you really just don't know. And especially younger teachers who've gone through teacher education recently, they are really getting a heavy dose of this type of stuff in teacher education. They're being told the respectful thing to do is when you have a class, on the first day of class, you've got to ask everyone what their pronouns is and all that type of thing. So there is all kinds of movements with this, and it's core to the reason.
They're told, hold on, they're told what?
Yeah, it's become a common practice in the universities that are putting student teacher candidates, people getting their teaching license. They're telling them now that it's very common that you should ask kids their pronouns at the beginning of the school year and their class and this type of thing, you know? So
that gives an opening that the boy can say,
yeah. And even there's districts who they've, you have to officially register the kid, and it's always been you identify whether they're male or female. They've put in like a neutral category in a lot of these districts. And generally, the more liberal the place you live in, the more you're going to see this type of stuff, without a doubt. But look, I mean, it highlights the need to proactively educate people. And again, I don't recommend to send kids to these schools, because even if that stuff is not there.
Let's make that clear. You're a public school dude. You don't recommend that you send.
And look, Eddie,
the last place they want to be.
And Eddie, a thing I talk about at length in my training and book is practices in school that get the kids to do shirk. It gets them to adopt habits that are shirk, partake in learning activities that are shirk.
In the public institution.
Yes, and the teachers don't understand this. It's an even bigger issue than this. And sometimes it's laced into the curriculum, this type of thing. So I mean, all the issues you mentioned, I go over that stuff in my book and in my extended training. I'm not saying that a teacher doing that will, fix everything like that, but it at least reveals the problems to them. And it at least gives those people an authentic education about Islam to someone who wouldn't get it otherwise. But yeah, I don't recommend families send their kids to public school. But, we do have many families who they don't have a choice and they're stuck. And especially if you are a young adult and you grew up here, you feel competent with the English language. You should contact your old school and tell them, as an alumni here, I wish that my teachers had learned this while they were there. And you can refer them to my website, abrahameducation.com, or refer them to my book. Certainly, if you're a parent in the district, even if you homeschool the kids, which you should, explain to them, I want you to learn why I don't send my kids to your school and why I can't send my kid to public school, that type of
thing. One more thing. Why would a public institution, here we see that more than $200,000 spent, this is taxpayer money, I believe, on drag queen shows at New York schools.
I know, I heard about that.
You heard about that? Why are they having male strippers come in and read books to children?
Well, look, that whole crowd, they have a lot of money behind them. They have a lot of activism behind them. And actually the organization you really should analyze, Eddie, is Gleason, GLSEN, if you haven't looked at them. I did a podcast with a YouTuber called Mr. Middlepath, where I broke down some of their documents. They are a nonprofit organization. They've been around since the early 90s, but they are heavily corporate funded by Target, YouTube, all these different big companies, Disney, they just have a direct partnership with Disney. And, they create all these model policies, they will call them, of how you treat transgender, how you respect LGBT kids, all this type of stuff. The big area that they will really get into and that they've gotten into is actually the field of counseling in education, counseling and social work, which is heavily linked to the fields of psychology. So a lot of times student counselors, who very often a school counselor is a licensed psychologist. A lot of times they have been put through professional development programs, or they might have learned it in their licensure program in the university, that it's a that the proper protocols of how you respect LGBT kids or a kid who thinks they might be that or this type of thing is exactly what this organization Gleason tells you that they should. And they have a whole bunch of research that I think could be very heavily criticized to ostensibly back that up. But that creates the problem where, like people have heard about, there's a story in Canada where a father in British Columbia, I think he got like arrested or something for child abuse for not allowing his daughter to identify as a son and this type of stuff. So a lot of places in the public school system in America, it's not that there's laws that are that way yet. Certainly in California, they're trying to push for that type of thing. But you might have people who they see it as a best practice in their profession to treat it like that. And I have had student counselors contact me who told me they had a Muslim student who was in elementary school who was a biological female identifying as a male and was coming to the counselor to talk about this. The counselor themselves identified as LGBT. They were encouraging it upon the student. And I challenged them to tell the parent. They would not tell the parents about it. I told that they would not tell the parents about the counseling they were giving.
So you can't counsel them away from anything, but you can counsel them towards it.
I mean, I would say that it's very common that school counselors are taught explicitly that these days. It's very explicit. And again, if you look up this organization, Gleason, GLSEN, you look up their model policy framework for transgender students or model policy framework for LGBT students, they will say this explicitly. They will say explicitly that if a student is at your school and they identify by a gender different than their biological birth, the parents' permission for the school, the parents' permission is not a prerequisite for everyone in the school identifying them that way. They will say that. Now, I have to emphasize that organization has a lot of money behind them. They have corporate America behind them. They have Disney behind them, but they don't have the weight of the law behind them. So this is the kind of games that are being played. And again, it's something to fear as a Muslim parent. It is. But at the same time, we can't be so paralyzed by fear that we don't proactively educate ourselves and proactively advocate ourselves. We cannot be that way. And I will tell you too, Eddie, your average public school teacher, and there's actually research that shows this and surveys that shows this, the average public school teacher in America is more socially conservative than the average American. They might vote liberal, but when it comes to social values, it's been found through long-term research that the average public school teacher is more socially conservative than the average American. So there is, without a doubt, in my opinion, a silent majority in the field of public education of people who want more pushback about this. Especially, I'm having an increase in people in California doing my training. A lot of those people explicitly tell me that they want the Muslim families to speak out more about what the district is talking about, making the bathrooms gender neutral and all this type of stuff. They can tell that the Muslim students and Muslim families are not okay with this.
Speak out more.
Yeah. They're actually looking for families to speak out about this more. I will say too, I do know families, a lot of families, in closed door channels, a lot of our families actually are speaking out about this, but not in a public way. And that might be the right way to do it. But too often too, it's reactive. And we can't always be trying to educate people about ourselves in a reactive way.
Yeah.
We have to be proactive. We have to put people through an educational continuum where they learn about Islam the proper way. Because I'll tell you something, Eddie, when you talk about how we don't agree with this, we this is against our religion. When you say that to someone, you say this is against my religion or our religion. The way the Western mind construes that is, well, it wants everything to be individually subjective. So it says, well, okay, that's your religion. That's you. So maybe if we just talk about it in a different way, we can finagle things. So now you interpret your religion in a different way. So one of the first things I focus on teaching people about Islam is that it is a text-based religion. And its jurisprudence is entirely based on texts. And someone who tries to teach about it without reference to its text, they lose legitimacy in it. Now, when you teach that to people on the front end, then when you're having a conversation about your religious needs as a Muslim, the whole conversation is on a different platform because the religion is not what I say it is. It's not what you say it is. It's not what I interpret or want it to be. No, it's about what the preserved texts say it is. So there needs to be deference to that. And when you educate people about that on the front end, then you have that understanding built in. So the whole conversation is different now.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. We're out of time. People, can we see, what's the book again?
Yeah, Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools. You can find it on Amazon. Please refer people to abrahameducation.com. Refer educators to that, please.
May God Almighty Allah reward you sharing your story with us. We went over a lot. Next time we can go deeper into this subject. It's very interesting. I had a lot more questions. Hopefully we'll save it for next time.
So happy
because
to.
it's a very important topic, but we're out of time. Until then, assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.
Walaikum assalam wa barakatuh.
And I want to thank you guys for tuning in. A lot of scary stuff out there, but there's hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel, even for someone like Salman Rushdie. Yes, there is. If he turned his life around, if he got this message and he changed his ways and he turned to the creator of the heavens and the earth, God Almighty, the creator alone, like our brother did here, his heart was open. And all he had to do was read 5 verses from the 2nd chapter of the Quran. Why don't you take that upon yourself to go ahead and get a free copy of the Quran? If you're in the United States here, go ahead and visit thedeenshow.com and we'll get you the book that helped Michael Abraham to change his life around. You saw where he started off, where he's at, what made him that he's on the show reciting the living miracle, the Quran, in the original language here with you on the Deen Show. And he's living the way of Jesus, of Moses, of Abraham, who he's named after his last name. They weren't Jews or Christians, none of them. They were ones who submitted their will to one and only one God. And this is Islam, worshiping the creator, not the creation. And we got to take this matter serious, because enough of wishful thinking. You're thinking, I'm going to live forever. They're going to make some pill or something. Science is evolving and I'm going to get a new body and go ahead. Yeah, that's wishful thinking. But you got to prepare for death, and it's coming. So take the matter serious and look into Islam. It is the way of life, comprehensive, simple to understand, and gives you that light at the end of the tunnel. What else can I say? Tune in here every week. Don't forget about our project, the Deen Center, and support us there. And we'll see you next time. Until then, peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum.
This is your brother, Hamza Andreas Zorzis, and I want every single one of you to support Eddie from The Deen Show financially and otherwise. But in what way? I want you to support his new project, the Deen Center. It's going to be a transformative experience, this center. Why? Because it's going to be a masjid, it's going to be a place of worship, it's also going to have fitness facilities, and it's also going to be a dawah center to call people back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Muslims and non-Muslims. And we trust Eddie completely. I, for one, will take 1,000 bullets for Eddie. He has a vision, he has more than 15 years of experience in the dawah, he's had a huge success with the Deen Show, and he has the support of many du'at and preachers and scholars from all around the world. It's going to be an amazing project for everybody. Go to thedeenscenter.org, donate now.
And if you like this episode of the Deen Show, like this video, share this video far and wide, and support us on our Patreon page so we can continue this work. Thank you for tuning in. Peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum.